Dajaha, hi guys, it's Shanae and welcome back to my channel. So today is going to be a little bit of a different video. I wanted to do a video for the anniversary of my first reaction to Heaven Official's Blessing, aka Tengun Tsufu. That reaction is still my highest viewed video on this channel and it really has a lot of meaning to me, so I thought it would be fun to do an anniversary video, and I thought I'd do it in the form of kind of theorizing about what I think the creators of the live action version of Heaven Official's Blessing in order to circumnavigate the Chinese censorship while still trying to maintain and retain as much of the original novel as possible. One thing before we do get into it that I forgot to mention is please be aware there is gonna be all the spoilers in this. I didn't hold back in terms of spoilers. This is not a spoiler safe video for people who haven't read the novel, because there's a lot of things that I address that haven't yet happened in either the manhwa or the donghua. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon member, finding my social media, or supporting the channel in any other way, all of those will be linked below. And if you want to subscribe, that is always greatly appreciated. But now, without further ado, let's get into today's video. First and foremost, I think the biggest and safest play that they could do for Ho Chang's character is playing up his admiration for Shilian to that of almost a devotee. So the reason why I say that is because I feel like in that way they can disguise a lot of the things that could otherwise alarm censorship as the acts of someone who is very devoted to a person they follow. So for example, the 10,000 lanterns, the fact that he painted Shilian for his shrine, and also the 10-foot statue that I'm really hoping will make an appearance despite my reservations about how the CGI of that is potentially going to look. Second would be the kissing to transfer spiritual energy. So that was quite an interesting addition to the novel, and I think it's something that we'll keenly feel the loss of in the censorship unless they change everyone else's method of transferring energy. So for example, if they were to ensure that all the other characters transferred energy through putting their hands on each other's shoulders or touching each other's foreheads or anything less personal, then if it's only Shilian and Ho Chang who transfer energy through holding hands, that could potentially pass censorship while also making it more intimate for them specifically and more romantically based than for any of the other characters. So that was the only solution I could really come up with. If you have any other suggestions for how you think they could circumnavigate this one, I'd be interested to hear it in the comments. Third would be the ring. The ring might be removed because even though we know that the ring has massive significance in that it holds Ho Chang's ashes, it also indicates a massive amount of trust and love that Ho Chang holds for Shilian that might not be okay in the eyes of the censorship gods. If you add on to that the significance of a ring also signifying marriage and commitment and all of that, I think altogether it might just be too much for the censorships to allow that scene to exist. The only way I could potentially see them passing this would be if there was a slight rewrite in the scripts, and in a moment where Ho Chang was going off to somewhere he perceived as dangerous or the audience perceived as dangerous while Shilian stayed behind, he could potentially give Shilian the ring for safekeeping, saying that it's something like a family heirloom to be kept safe, and it's only hinted at later that there might be more to the story than it just being that. I could maybe see it being passed by censorship safely, but I don't know if that's too much of a reach. I'd be interested to see if they were able to keep it and how they could justify that. Fourth is the red string. So that one was also a big concern for me in terms of having it removed entirely because of its close association with the red string of fate. But I can see them maybe being able to pass it off if they were maybe to move it. So instead of having it on the pinky finger, they would have it on their wrists, which kind of disconnects it from that myth a little bit. And if they were able to frame it as an urgent solution rather than something more significant, I can see the censors maybe having it go past. And then when Ho Chang vanishes it, we could maybe have Shilian touching his wrists, and you can just kind of tell from the actor's communication that he still feels something there. So that way you can still have it without it hopefully raising any suspicions. Then we move on to some small things. So two things that I'm wondering if they'll keep is the umbrella and the earring. I know that they seem like things that would obviously be kept, but again, because it still ties into the romantic history, well, at least on Ho Chang's side, of Ho Chang and Shilian's relationship, I do wonder about it. So the first one would be the umbrella. I think they did a good job in the donghua of having it paralleled in the scene where Shilian meets Ho Chang as the ghost groom, and the flashback that they have there. And if they can do that for Shilian's earring, which is the other item that I would be concerned they would remove altogether, and kind of hint at its existence or kind of acknowledge it matching without ever explicitly saying it, they might be able to get away with still incorporating the history of those two items. This one is kind of like a what they could add section. It's still on the small things list, but it's something that I don't think is ever really explicitly stated in the novel, but they could potentially add into the live action just to create deeper meaning. Because as you see with Untamed, for example, there were a few instances that didn't actually happen exactly that way in the novel, but that they added in to deepen the relationship before everything went sour. So I feel like they could potentially use this as a way to deepen the relationship between Shilian and Ho Chang as well. And that is to kind of show when Shilian's bad luck would have tipped the scale against them, and then having it kind of magically corrected. And then once you find out about Ho Chang's good luck, you kind of start realizing how many times Ho Chang has helped Shilian in moments that otherwise just seemed odd. But that might be straying too far from the novel, and I'm not sure how exactly they would be able to incorporate that before Shilian finds out about Ho Chang's good luck. So yeah, that was just a thought I had that I thought I'd slip in here, but not sure how well that would work. Another small thing that they could do is by choosing the words that they use in reference to Ho Chang and Shilian very carefully to hint at something deeper. An example I would like to use is from the manhwa when they're in the sandstorm and Shilian says something to the effect of asking Ri to grab onto something stable. And we know as the audience that Ho Chang has been the only stable presence in Shilian's life for the past 800 years, even when Shilian himself doesn't know this at that point. So things like that could really build up the tension between them, so to speak, as well as building on the subtext of their relationship. So next on my list would be the symbolism and parallels that we see already demonstrated in the manhwa and in the donghua, and that I think they could also easily incorporate into the live action as well. Firstly would be Ho Chang's title as Crimson Rainsword Flower. So one of the ways that I think I might have seen already incorporated in the small bits of behind the scenes that we've seen is it seems that in Ho Chang's later costume designs there are actually flowers embroidered onto his clothing. Now of course I might have misseen that, or it just looks differently on the photos than it actually is in real life. Maybe those are butterflies, but I think that if those are flowers and maybe that is the clothing that he wears the first time Shilian meets him as the bridegroom, I feel like that could already hint towards his name without us immediately having to, you know, connect everything. Regardless of if it's butterflies or flowers though, those designs could be kind of brought into Shilian's wedding dress design the same way they did for the Donghua, and it already kind of strengthens their connections. And I think that if they do it right, it could be subtle enough that it again would not be an issue. I'm really hoping that that is something that they can bring in, because I thought that bringing it into the Donghua was so clever, and I'd love to see that detail held to the live action as well. Side note, I just am very keen to see how Shilian's wedding dress is gonna look, regardless of if they keep with those kinds of designs or not. So yeah. Of course, depending on how detailed the filmmakers want to be with their symbolism, I feel like it could be the equivalent of what poetry was in Word of Honor. And if they do it right, that could be very interesting. I feel like we saw a lot of symbolism in the Modazushi Donghua, so we know that, you know, there's enough symbolism to draw from that they could potentially, instead of foreshadowing the plot like they did in the Modazushi Donghua, foreshadowing the relationship between the different characters, and especially focusing on Ho Chang and Shilian. I'd especially be intrigued to see if there is specific symbolism and hinting of relationships going on between foxes and rabbits, or butterflies and flowers, as I feel like those are the two things most associated in my mind with Shilian and Ho Chang. So if they bring that in, it's a bonus. Okay, so next would be the symbolism of Sanlang's names. So I know that there's a lot of theories going around about Sanlang's name. I'm gonna kind of be reiterating some of those theories and adding on my 2 cents, but if you want a good video on that as well, I would recommend Kekta's video on that. I'll link it here if you're interested in checking it out after this video is done. But yeah, Samlang's name is pretty important. For me personally, I'd always assumed that part of why he chose Sun AK3 was because of the 3 times that he revived for Shilian and the 3 times that Shilian ascended. So that kind of mirrors each other. So with that as kind of a foundation, I feel like the creators could potentially use the number 3 if they want to draw attention to something that is connected to Ho Chang, but that they couldn't necessarily full out acknowledge because of censorship, or if they want to emphasize important moments in the two's relationship, also having the number 3 in some way, shape or form, either with scenery or dialogue or things like that, highlighting those moments. Especially when it comes to things that might be censored out if it was confirmed that Ho Chang did this specific thing for Shilian's sake. Next would be the lighting. So it's very interesting. I didn't see this as much in the Donghua as I did in the manhwa, but I still thought that it was pretty interesting to see it crop up in the manhwa, and I wanted to bring it into here as well. And that is that in many of the panels that's anticipating of Ho Chang's arrival in Shilian's life, you have the dominant color being red, and I feel like if they can kind of have naturalish looking lighting hint at that in the same way in the live action, it could be very interesting. And I feel like if you then, you know, establish it in the first 2, so in the blood rain scene and then also in the scene where they meet on the cart for the first time, and then later on in the live action you have red lights or red undertones in the setting coming up, it could almost create a placebo effect for the audience, anticipating that he's about to arrive, he's about to save the day, it's gonna be fine, you know. And I feel like that could also work to highlight where Shilian's mind probably is in certain moments. So if he's thinking about Ho Chang, or if he's hoping that Ho Chang will come, you know, all of those things can potentially then be worked into almost having lighting be part of symbolism in that way, if that makes any sense. So then the last official thing before I jump into a random tangent is Hwo-chang's acts of service. So bear with me, but there's this thing called the 5 love languages. I know of it. I haven't like done in-depth research about it or anything, but I've heard about it. And one of those 5 love languages is acts of service. Now, I genuinely believe that that could be one of Hwo-chang's ways of showing love to Shilian, is his acts of service that he does for Shilian. For example, Hwo-chang making a door for the shrine and fixing Shilian's hat because he's well aware of how important both of those things are for Shilian. Giving Shilian his armory because he knows that it's important. Making Shilian feel like he actually existed, like he actually mattered by painting the painting for him that's also hanging in the shrine. All these small things that might seem pretty inconsequential, but because Shilian has been so used to settling for less for most of the last 800 years, someone paying attention to his needs in that way, I think is something that he really needs. And if they then emphasize those things, emphasize the impact that Shilian is feeling. Lastly is a personal thing of mine. I don't know really what to call it, but it's some thoughts that I had that I'd love to see translated. But because this is just a lot of me projecting onto the novel, the chances of it actually making it into the live action are pretty slim. Still, I wanted to mention it because if nothing else, then I can at least have this. An important parallel for me personally is the parallel of Hwo-chang shielding a white flower from the blood rain on the day that he got his title / name of Crimson Rain Sword Flower. Then with the first encounter of Shilian and Hwo-chang again during the bridegroom situation, we have Hwo-chang walking side by side with Shilian and again shielding someone who is usually dressed in white against blood rain with his umbrella. So if you recall earlier, I mentioned that along with the fox and rabbit that are kind of like the official mascot animals for Shilian and Hwo-chang, I also feel that a butterfly and a flower are 2 items that represent the 2 of them as well, and this is partly why. If the creators were to indulge in the symbolism, it might be interesting if they were to establish the connection between Shilian and those flowers and have that flower kind of reappear throughout the rest of the series, having it maybe happen at more pivotal emotional moments, or if Hwo-chang is thinking of Shilian, you would almost basically have the flower be a stand-in for Shilian at pivotal moments where censorship would interfere otherwise. If I'm being honest, probably everything that I just said could be a giant mess, but in my imagination it works. Oh my goodness, that being said, I just imagined the coffin scene but with a flower. That would not work. The coffin scene I'm honestly interested in because I'm like, I wonder how it's gonna work. We know that that scene still exists because there were some shots of behind the scenes of that scene being leaked, or at least that's what they think it is. I do think that one way they could maybe make it work is if we have them in the coffin and then Hwo-chang has to move a Ming to the side because it was poking at Shilian. That was the only thing I could think of that might make it past the censors, but I don't even know if that would. So yeah, again, if you have an idea for how you think that scene went past the censors, please let me know. Okay, so those were all my thoughts and theories of how some moments could potentially be slipped past the censors. I know that this video was quite long and a bit ridiculous, but I had a lot of fun taking a deeper look at Hwo-chang and Shilian's relationship and kind of trying to figure out how more of the important moments could be incorporated into the show. So I hope you guys still enjoyed it. If you made it this far, thank you guys so much, and let me know what your favorite Hualien moment is that you're hoping will make it into the live action. I hope you guys have an amazing day, and otherwise I'll see you guys again next time. 再见。